everyone. It's great to see you all. I'm here with Alysia Sawchyn and Alyson Synclair of the Rumpus. I'm very excited to hear all about this magazine. And welcome to everyone. As always, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type your questions into the chat and I will work them into the conversation. And apologies if my voice gets weird. I'm here in Philly and there are like all these air quality warnings. So I'm like, anyway, that's what's going on here. But great to see you guys. So tell us, I know the Rumpus has been around for a very long time. Alyson, you are the publisher and owner, and Alysia, editor-in-chief. So Alyson, if you want to just jump in, tell us about the history of the magazine and when you kind of came on board.
Sure. So I've known of the Rumpus since it started in 2009, but have not been a part of it until the last couple of years. It started, I think, more as like a pop culture, arts and culture magazine. And then over the years, especially under the helm of the previous owner, Marissa Siegel, shifted more squarely into like the literary space. So it used to be that they would do film reviews, they would do, they go to concerts and report on that, and just kind of all different areas of like pop culture, not so much original fiction or poetry. That was something that Marissa started to bring into the mix. So we've shifted over the years into that space. And it started really with some really well-known people, or now they're very well-known, such as like Cheryl Strayed and Roxane Gay and Sam Irby. Isaac Fitzgerald was an early managing editor, and they all helped shape the magazine in a big way. It's always been pretty much completely volunteer run. There's been some stipends, I think, on and off throughout the years for a managing editor position or an editor position, but generally it's been volunteer run and pretty open to new voices. Yeah, so today we publish fiction, nonfiction, poetry, essays, book reviews, author interviews. We do original comics, and then we have a few columns that come in and out every year. A few that we have right now have been around for about a year, and we're continuing to like think of new ways to bring people into the fold.
Sure. That's great. I think the columns might be one of the most well-known features. Was it the Dear Sugar column with Cheryl Strayed that started on the Rumpus? Is that correct?
Yeah, that started on the Rumpus and had a couple of different contributors. Steve Allman was also a part of Dear Sugar. And that we stopped publishing that well before my time, but we definitely still get a lot of traffic and a lot of people that come to us and love Cheryl and love the column. And that it's taken so many different iterations over the years, because she had a podcast, and now and a book, and now with Tiny Beautiful Things is like a Hulu series. But with everything we've ever published, the author retains their rights. So there's nothing that like kicks back to the Rumpus. If someone gets a book deal or someone gets a film deal or anything like that, we're super happy for them, but it doesn't really affect us in any way except for traffic.
Sure, that's great. And also there's a Funny Women column. Is that still?
Yes, that's still going. Yeah, so it's humor writing by non-men, and Alyssa Bassist is the editor of that one. She's the founding editor and is still a part of the magazine and still the person that is making those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Great. So can you give us an overview of your staff and your editorial process? And I just took a quick look at the masthead. It looked like there were only 3 people, but I can't believe that only 3 people do it. So I might have missed full staff, but tell us I guess just with regular submissions, fiction, poetry, nonfiction, and then we can talk about the columns specifically, but what happens, who looks at it, how do pieces go from the slush to eventual publication?
Okay, I'm going to tag team with Alysia on this one, our editor-in-chief, but most everything that we publish is unsolicited and it comes through Submittable. We have open reading periods and everything gets read at least twice by two different people. So that's a lot of content. I think last year we had over 6,000 submissions, almost 7,000 submissions through Submittable. And we have different reading periods for different genres. So we'll open for essays for a month or two, then we'll open for poetry for a month or two, that kind of rotate throughout. And I think there are, as far as like assistant and editor positions, I think there are around 20 or so people in those roles. And then we have a rotating bunch of readers that come in and out as needed, and some stick around for many years. And I know we have some readers that have been reading for us for over 10 years, which is pretty wild. Alysia, do you want to talk about how it goes through the pipeline?
I feel like you just said everything I was going to say. So I don't, do you have like Becky, do you have like a specific follow-up question? Because I feel like that was a pretty good overview, but I'm happy to get into the weeds if that's something that's of interest.
Yeah, let's go through almost like how a bill becomes a law. So take us through like how a piece, who are the first eyes on a piece, what happens,
Okay.
If it's like a maybe, then where does it go? And what is the process? How are decisions ultimately made at the magazine?
And set it to song also,
yeah, exactly.
most important.
Do a little cartoon.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can do that. So one of the funny things about the magazine, because it's so big, is that the answer is it depends for almost everything. And so by that, I mean, for example, the sections are all different in their processes. So for example, the fiction team has 3 layers of staff. So there are readers, and then there are assistant editors, and then there are editors. And so at least 2 readers will read a piece. And if both say yes, then the assistant editors will look at them, and then they will kick up some. I will say that I know for the fiction team, for example, the editors are the ones who make all the final decisions. So the assistant editors don't accept or reject anything. But sometimes the assistant editors do edits. So like, for example, if the fiction editors accept something, sometimes an assistant editor will take a piece for edits. So there's at least like 3 rounds of reading happening with fiction, for example. For poetry, we do very few edits with poets, just to be really frank about it. It's usually like either the poems are ready to go or they're not. But this is in part just because like, I don't know, I feel like, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but like, because poems are so short, like, and there's so much entailed in them, like, it's one of those things where it's like, if a fiction writer, you're like, oh, there's like a widow on this page, like an extra word or something, like, let's just move that up or something. Most of the time they're like, yeah, fine. But if a poet's like, oh, you can't be like, let's just get rid of that one word when they're like 50 words. So anyway, this is all to say, poems are usually like taken as is, but the way that we do it is we publish a minimum of 2 poetry pieces. And so like, it's reading poetry, I like, God bless that team, because it's like, they're reading for like 2 pieces out of 8. So that is a whole thing. And then we have a number of the poetry team. So like, for example, we have 2 poetry editors, but then we have Brian Spears and sometimes Molly Spencer and sometimes Lena, who are, their actual roles are like poetry reviews editor, or like one person does the poetry book chats. And just depending on what's going on, sometimes they'll go in and look at that, make that final decision. So the poetry team is a little bit different. And then with essays, funny enough, I am the point person for that, like the final round. So there are, again, like the fiction team, there are like 3 different layers of reads, but then I'm like the final say for that one. Yeah, so they're all really different. But and these are just the 3 sort of main poetry, fiction, nonfiction, like general submissions. The other ones are different. So yeah, there's a lot happening all the time.
That's great. So can you tell us more about the kinds of work that you're looking for, like the tone? So you have the column for funny women, but not the creative work that you publish is not all necessarily funny, right? So like, but I do think of the Rumpus as kind of like, not quirky, but like playful, I guess would be the word. So does that sort of categorize the kind of creative work that you're looking for, or are you just like open to anything across the board? And if it's easier to speak like more specifically about each genre, like maybe what you're looking for in essays, what you're looking for in poetry, what you're looking for in fiction. I know that's a very big question to take on, but just if you can kind of talk about that a little.
Yeah, sure. It's funny you said that because I remember when we were applying for the a bunch of grants this year, we had to like, Allie and I had to make a lot of documentation that didn't exist before, and including things like, you know, define your magazine in like a short, succinct phrase. And we spent a really long time trying to be like, all right, what is this? And I forget exactly the word that I used, but it was something along the lines of like feisty, which I feel like is like tonally similar to what you're describing. So yeah, sorry, this is all to say, like, I think we're pretty open to anything. However, like across the genres, but, and I say that because like I remember this is before I became editor-in-chief, but when Marissa was editor-in-chief and I was an editor in the features section, I remember a couple of essays coming through the queue that like, I love researched essays, and I know a number of the other editors who are still features editors do as well. And this is why it's so great to have like multiple people looking at a piece, because in the comments, like some of the readers and assistant features editors had said stuff like, I don't know if this is like a Rumpus essay. And me and some of the other people were like, well, what if we want it to be? Isn't that the point of like working on a journal, is like you get to decide what makes a piece a Rumpus piece? And we talked to Marissa about that. And Marissa was like, yeah, of course. So we do take a really big range of stuff. And a lot of it really just depends on like, I will say I've worked at a couple of journals, and for our fiction and our essays team, we do way more edits than I've ever seen at a lit mag, which I think is very much like a holdover from the Rumpus's roots, and also part of how we, why and how we work with emerging voices a lot of the time. And so what that means for us is that like we need, like our editors have to be enthusiastic. In addition to like what I think, I need editors who are like enthusiastic about the pieces, who want to work with the writers. And so a lot of it is really just it's our staff who decides like what makes an essay a Rumpus essay, or what makes a story a Rumpus story. And so I do think that like looking at the stuff we've published recently, we've definitely started to veer a little toward like, definitely some research stuff, but also like very voice-driven pieces. I'm trying to like not speak in terms of genre, but research, voice-driven, like weird. And by weird, I don't mean weird, but like magic type of like fantastical type of stuff, just askew perhaps. And with this website redesign, especially, like we've started to lean in this direction, and I'm really looking forward to this because it's a personal love of mine, but stuff that is formally innovative. And we're, you know, we have limited capacity to publish and showcase formally innovative stuff right now, but it's something that our editors really love and we're hoping to do more of. Similarly with like comics and stuff, like I know the comics editor. So like comics is an example of a section where like that's one person. And I did bring on the comics editor. So when I did it, I was like, I wholly trust your judgment. I've known you for a long time, go forth. If you have questions in here, you know, but she works pretty independently. But like when I look at her, what she takes, there's a pretty big mix, but there's something like whimsical or magical or strange, I think, in the work that she takes, for example.
So we have a question here, just brass tacks. When are your reading periods for poetry? The website says January and July, but submittable only as January dates, which sometimes happens with magazines. Submittable isn't always lined up with what the magazine says, but if you could tell us just reading periods for the different genres, that would be great.
I actually can't answer that specific question better than I can all of them, because honestly, I do not have all of them memorized. I think we are open for essays right now. We are opening for fiction, I believe, again in August. We're generally open twice a year. The reason that the website and the submittable are different right now is because our poetry backlog was so big that it got to the point where in January when we were open, I forget how long we were open for. We were open for like 3 days, and literally hundreds of submissions came in like 48 hours or something wild like that. And it became like, we're just not, at this point, it seems like insincere to continue accepting submissions when like we can't even respond to people in a prompt, timely manner. And so we sent notifications via like our newsletters and stuff to be like, this is unmanageable for us and we have to close. I think part of this is because we're also free, like our submissions are free, we don't charge for them, which is great and like morally and ethically something that Allie and I both really strongly believe in. But it also means that we literally, I looked just before coming on here, like last year we had almost 6,800 submissions for our volunteer staff.
For
the whole year. This is like last magazine as a whole. We had 6,800 submissions, and we publish about 450 writers a year. Both of those numbers are, I think, extraordinary and kind of terrifying when I think about them. So I try not to a lot. But anyway, this is all to say, when we closed down the submissions in January for poetry, it was like, all right, we need to figure out a way that like we can actually get through this backlog. Mm-hmm. And so, knock on fake wood that my computer is resting on, we are on track to open again in July. But we didn't want to put that in our submittable until we were confident that like our backlog was actually clear and that we could actually consider the poets who were sending us their work again. So that is like the long answer to the question about reading periods.
It's actually really helpful. I mean, it gives good, useful insight into what's going on behind the scenes. And there's a comment here from someone that just says, thank you for doing that. And I think it actually, in my view, and maybe in others' views, it builds trust when editors do things like that, because it means we know they're actually taking the submission seriously and they're not just keeping the doors open and, you know, letting whatever come in. So I think, yeah, I think that's great. And we have a question here. Are you open to flash pieces? This person specifically wants to know about creative nonfiction, but also fiction.
We actively publish flash fiction, I want to say like once a month. So fiction publishes on Mondays, and one of those Mondays is typically a flash piece. For nonfiction, I would say like we do, but we don't explicitly say that we publish flash. So that, yeah, it's sort of a sneaky answer, because like I know, for example, not Brevity, but many journals that take flash have specific guidelines that say things like, if you're submitting flash, you can submit up to 3 essays, and we don't. So yeah, we're a little sneaky, but the short answer is like, we do publish flash essays. Like we don't not publish them. It's just a question of, we don't explicitly ask for them. And so we're not sent very many. Yeah.
So I have a question that I've actually yet to ask any editors, but I will debut this question with you. You seem like you might have given it some thought. I'm curious about like the AI situation with writing and submitting, and I'm wondering if you have any policy about AI submissions, if you've talked about it, if you plan to draft some kind of policy. It's just something that I've noticed like more and more lit mags are kind of having to define their position in terms of AI. So I was just wondering if you thought about it, dealt with it, given any thought to it.
It's a conversation that I've been following, especially through CLMP. We're a part of that, like a lot of other literary journals. And what I'm hearing so far is that a lot of journals that focus on speculative fiction or writing in different genres are getting inundated, or were, at least at the beginning of or a couple months ago, with Chat GPT and all that stuff really catching on. But from what I'm hearing, it's really obvious so far what is what is a chat GPT or AI generated story. This is a question I think we should think more about. I'm not actively in Submittable looking at the stuff that's coming through. So I'm curious to hear and haven't so far. We do whole staff meetings pretty regularly. So we'll have that next week. So that is a good question for me to bring up for all the teams if they've seen things that seem questionable, or they're not, or maybe it's even been disclosed that it's Chat GPT or AI generated. A good but scary question a little bit. I would hope that like we're human enough to tell the difference.
Yeah. So going back to the Rumpus as it is now, can you tell us like what you're looking for when you encounter a submission, again, fiction, nonfiction, or poetry? Like what kind of experience, like you've talked about the kind of work that you like to publish or, you know, seek to promote, but can you tell us a little bit about like what kind of experience you like to have as a reader from a piece? Are you looking for work that is like shocking? Are you looking for something that is more intellectually stimulating? Are you looking for like an emotional experience? All of the above? Do you want it to be something that just, you know, punches you in the gut and you can't stop thinking about it? Or what, if you can sort of like pin down what it is what experience you're trying to have when you read a submission, what would that be?
I'm thinking now of I had this teacher in grad school who was really, she gave these amazing lectures, but she used to do this like imitation of a New York agent. And she would put on this like funny, not New York accent, and she would be like, I want to be transported. And that was how she described agents wanting to feel with work. And that is not what I would say for myself, but that is what I was thinking of when you were asking that question. I think that in terms of the reading experience, two things. Thing number one, I think that if somebody is not, I think that, and I say this not just because, you know, we rely on our volunteers to get everything done, but I think that reading for a lit mag is like one of the best things that you can do for your writing. And the reason is this, is because for me as a reader, the thing that I want most is to not be bored. And so like any of those responses that you articulated for me, I am, and I do, and this is in part because like in my capacity as editor-in-chief, I have to, how do I put this? So like, for example, the poetry section. I'm not a poet, though I've written and published poetry, but I would not call myself a poet. And I know that like, I have a particular taste in poetry. Like there are certain poems that I like, and it's a narrowish like taste, my personal taste. And so as an editor, like it's different for me reading for myself, or like, am I reading for work? And those are like two different feelings of reading. And so like when I read as an editor, any of those options that you articulated are things that I would happily respond to. But what it essentially is like I'm engaged in some way. I'm not bored. And the reason that I think that reading is so useful for writers is because it gives you a real sense of the stories that people tell over and over again, which like, all stories are the same story, the human experience, whatever, right? But like, yes, that's true, but also there are still different ways of telling a story, right? Even if your experience is not unique, like there's still different ways to come at it. And becoming a reader for a magazine just inundates you with like, oh, so a former student of mine is a reader for us now. And I was like, you're not great. I'm not grading you anymore. Like, you don't have to suck up. But I was talking to them on the phone the other day, and they were like, I really understand now what you mean when you said like, oh, these things are not necessarily like, they are in fact quite common when I was doing it in my writing. She's like, and I didn't believe you. And now I do. And I was like, oh, thank you. That's very validating. But yeah, just like, consuming essentially like all these pages really gives you a good sense of like the stuff that people send in all the time. And it's like, for example, like here's a great example. The pandemic, the ongoing pandemic. But like in 2020, I remember when I was reading, I became editor-in-chief in 2020. So like for the better part of the year, I was still on the nonfiction team reading submissions. And we got so many pandemic submissions. And I was like, no, this is not, all of these are, even though they weren't like the same piece, like in terms of like the tone and approach, like it was all very, I'm like, these are all so similar. And I remember reading one that wasn't even at the Rumpus, and it was like the one pandemic piece in 2020 that I was like, the approach and like the intent and everything, this makes sense to me. And this is great. And I love this. But everything was just so similar. And people don't know that unless they're reading. So sorry, that got a little away from me, I think.
No, I think that's a great answer. And actually a follow-up question is like, do you have any advice for, let's say a writer does want to write about something, the pandemic, or they want to write about something that is something out there now, you know, it's weighing on them. They can't not write about it. They don't want to like block themselves. But at the same time, they're aware that this is something that a lot of other people might be writing about. So do you have advice for how a writer can kind of dig in and make it more personal, more idiosyncratic, more original?
Yes. And I think I have a couple of different answers to this. The first thing I would say is my answer, like, okay, sorry. Let me foreground this appropriately. I think when writing about something that is like a big event, or like a big event is sort of adjacent to it. And so there are examples like the pandemic, right? Or like the war in Ukraine. But then there are also examples like the death of my mother, right? Which is not necessarily like a time thing, but like many people have written about. So with the former two examples, like there are some pieces that are like think pieces. And those are not our purview. And so I feel like, especially because we used to publish a lot of pop culture stuff back in the day, sometimes people do still try to send us those pieces. But for us personally, like we're just not a good venue for like the quick knee-jerk think piece. And so part of it, I think, is getting a sense of the magazine and the work that it publishes, because there are many journals that will publish those like quick turnaround, like off the cuff, more, I feel like the expressions I'm using are not necessarily like, they have some slightly negative connotation. I don't mean for them to, but I'm trying to separate the like immediate response type of writing, but that isn't journalism, from like the other thing. So if we're talking about the other thing, I think that what you said exactly is the answer in my experience, which is like, you or the writer, any writer, like is a specific person, and to pretend like you are not is insincere. And it is like the unique experience. And like, okay, obviously I'm like a nonfiction writer by training, which is why I have all these soapboxes about this, but it's of my belief that like the point of nonfiction, especially the personal essay, or like, you know, the more, I mean, I think all writing is subjective, whatever though, like creative nonfiction, let's say, is that it is like, this person is telling me the story. Like, I don't read Thomas Wolfe because I like architecture. Like, I read Tom Wolfe because like, I think he's really brilliant and I'm interested in his perspective on things. And I will read this book on Bauhaus architecture. And I will learn to love Bauhaus architecture from reading it, which is not something I thought I liked. And that's how I feel about the essay and nonfiction in general, is like, it's the person's view that I find interesting, less than the thing itself, most of the time. I mean, Tessa Fontaine, for example, which I'm thinking of her because she also lives where we live now. But she had a column on the Rumpus briefly where she was literally in a traveling circus, like breathing fire and snake handling. And like, yeah, I would read that. Okay, cool. So if you have something like that, that's a start. But even then, like, I can definitely envision some fire breathing pieces where like, because we have gotten some pieces where I'm like, yes, the premise of this is really engaging, but like the voice or like the story is like, I breathed fire. not like my mom is dying and I'm breathing fire in an attempt to like sort of figure out how to like go on without her, which is what Tessa was doing versus like I breathed fire by itself.
Interesting. That's really interesting. I'm glad to hear you mentioned Tom Wolfe, because I have been a huge fan of him, and not many people actually talk about him in the literary world. But he is so voicey, and I think that's exactly what you're getting at, right? Like he can take any situation, like the Merry Pranksters. Yes, that's interesting, but with his voice and his approach, it's so like bubbly and energetic and dynamic. So it sounds like that's kind of what you're looking for, is not just the subject matter, but also the voice, the person, the specific like vantage point of the writer.
And I think that's true across the genres at the Rumpus, is that a real voice focus.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just a quick follow-up, and then I know we have questions here, but so with the personal essays, just to clarify, are you looking for, it sounds like you're not looking for journalistic stuff, you're looking more for like personal experience essays. Okay.
One of those like, why is this person telling this story?
Right. Okay.
The investment.
So what qualifications, background, publishing history does the Rumpus look for in volunteer readers?
Honestly, the biggest thing is like, are you what's the word I'm looking for? Reliable isn't the word I'm looking for, but like consistency and like a willingness to like learn and read. But I mean, consistency is a big thing. Like many of the people who are readers for us have no background, like no formal background in creative writing, and many of our editors have. We learned this a few months ago, again, when we were doing these grant applications. Like a bunch of our editors have MBAs, and like almost an equal split of MBAs and MFAs in our editorial staff. Like, so formal education is really not necessary for us. It's more just like, you love to read, and you do the things that you say you will every week. And those are, I think, the two big qualifiers.
That's interesting. And in terms of who you publish, do you publish new writers, poets who don't have a long list of publishing credits, or do you tend to publish more established writers? And also relatedly, do you solicit work?
I was gonna, oh, sorry. I'll let Alysia jump in too on this one, but for the poetry, it's a mix. So all year round we publish poetry, and that tends to be a mix of emerging, sometimes first publication poets and established people, though that's coming through Submittable too. The exception to that is National Poetry Month, where we publish poetry every single day. So we do have a solicitation list on top of like what we might have seen throughout the year, because we know there's it's just a volume issue and we want to publish really good work.
So it sounds like a writer's cover letter maybe doesn't matter so much. Okay.
Some of the readers, a lot of the readers can't even see the cover letter. Like it's not, I heard somebody say this once, I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Dave Housley at Barrel House, but he said something like, a cover letter will never make or break your, like whether or not your piece gets accepted, but it will strongly suggest. And by that, like, and I can't imagine that anybody in here would do this, but like sometimes you get some cover letters that are like a little out there, which like you still read it, but like you might look at this cover letter and be like, I don't know if this person, you know, understands the world in the same way I do, in a really basic way. And that's really the only thing. But even then, you still read it and sometimes you're wrong. But that's like the largest extent a cover letter will have on an application.
Okay. And what are the Rumpus's thoughts on longer poems or poem sequences or series of poems?
Well,
I like to
well, now we're going to talk a little bit. Like Alysia said, whenever we do publish poems, we publish multiple poems at a time by by the author. So we're open to longer poems and poem sequences. We are like one of, if y'all are on social media at all right now, we're just like trying like crazy to raise money to redesign our website. And part of that is because we've had so many issues over the years with like formatting poetry the way we want to. And this is not necessarily has to do with length, but in some ways it does with line breaks and spaces and how we'd like to present poetry. But it's important to us to be able to publish the poems that we love, no matter how they might be formatted or the length of them.
And another question, Alyson, maybe you would be best to field this one. How do you think of the Rumpus? Is it a literary magazine, or do you think of it as a different? I sort of think of the Rumpus as not a literary magazine, maybe because of the features and its connection to pop culture and its columns. I don't know if I would call it like a commercial. It's sort of occupying like its own, maybe like sort of the Believer, the Rumpus, you know, there's sort of like this category of magazine that is more popular than a literary magazine, but publishes literary work. So do you have a vision or like a category for the magazine?
Oh, good question. I do agree with you. I think we do fall more into like hopefully the Believer kind of world, versus which they do publish original poetry. I don't think they publish original fiction. My background is as a literary book publicist, and I actually used to work for McSweeney's when they had the Believer, Lucky Peach, the Quarterly, the books. So it was kind of everything was happening there at once. So that's the type of publishing that I respect. And in some ways, there's some crossover with the starting in the Bay Area and the being open to like quirky or weirder, just non-traditionally literary spaces that I think we still both occupy. But I do think that we've moved more into a literary journal, but there's a hybrid. So I like the idea of us being in the same world as the Believer versus I don't know, like the Kenyon Review or some other great literary journals that are specifically literary journals. We're trying to connect all the dots between the different parts of the community, the literary community, from like reviews to interviews to essays to poetry to, you know, original fiction, like just kind of weaving those things together.
It's interesting because you're not affiliated with any university, so there's no kind of academic connection and there's no institutional backing. So you're fully independent. So it does seem like you're sort of in a world of your own, but with these literary, obviously with connections to the literary world and literary community, and still publishing literary work, but it is sort of like a league of its own.
Yeah, we don't have for better or worse, we don't have a lot of oversight into the decisions that we make. But that also means we don't have institutional funding or structure. We're kind of having to build that as we go, because it's kind of always been a labor of love. There weren't a lot of deep structural systems for the magazine when I came aboard, and Alicia's definitely helped build some of those, and Marissa did a ton of work in that way too. The previous owner publisher, but her approach to that was like, I'm going to take on everything myself, and I'm totally going to be the person that is accountable for this magazine, how we publish, like what we accept and everything, even though there's tons of readers and editors that were a part of bringing the work onto the site. But we realized we can't do that. That's like not really sustainable. So a couple of things that we did in the past year was to apply for fiscal sponsorship so we can start to apply for grants. And if there are people that care about tax deductible donations, I know you have to be a certain level of rich to care about that, that they can bring in money that way. But for the most part, how we work is just a lot of free labor, including me and Alysia. I do have now a small stipend that I pay to our editor-in-chief, to a managing editor that we just brought on board, and to someone that's helping me with like communications and web and store sites support, because we have a book club, we have a letters in the mail from authors subscription program, we have some merch, and we have a membership. Just trying to make all these pieces fit together, because we've all seen lots of even well-backed billionaire-backed publications disappear in the past few years. And the two of us are pretty hard-headed and have a lot of amazing other like readers and volunteers that are supporting us. So maybe we'll make it.
I want to come back to the fundraising issue, because I know it's important, but we have a question here. Just can we go back to the question of who Rumpus publishes in genres other than poetry? People want to know, like, do you publish emerging writers, unpublished? And maybe if you can give like a rough percentage of writers that are newer that you publish.
I honestly don't know what a percentage would be. I can make up a number, but I don't know how like accurate of a guess it is. I would say two things. Thing number one, and this is true. I will confidently say this. This is true not only of the Rumpus, but for any lit journal. It really, like, previous publications don't matter. What matters is that the work is good. I remember actually, and she actually just tweeted about this the other day. Cassie Mansmurray, who is now an agent, we published like the first essay that she ever wrote or submitted, and it was a notable in Best American like that same year, which is crazy and really cool. But yeah, I think she had like no previous publications because it was her first essay ever. And I've talked with other editors, and I've heard other editors give talks, and like editors love being able to tell stories like that. Like, we love being able to be like, we were the first person to publish so-and-so. Meakin, who works at Guernica, Meakin Armstrong, who was the fiction editor at Guernica for a really long time. I forget who it is now, but like he mentioned 2 or 3 writers that he was like, we published them first, and now they're so famous. So having no prior publications is never, ever a problem. And so I think when you say emerging writer, like, what I hear, and I don't know if this is accurate, but generally to me, that means like don't have a book yet. And to that, I would say most of our, especially essays, are emerging writers in that regard. And I think that's kind of what the Rumpus got known for, really, is in fact, like publishing emerging writers and then having them go on to be quite famous. Like most of those people that Ali mentioned at the beginning. And I feel like there was somebody who pretty recently also did like that nice little leap. But yeah, so that's very much what we're known for.
And a question here about why you don't charge charge for submissions.
Okay, so I have had multiple people ask me, they are like, why don't you do that? Won't you make money that way? Let's say we charge $3 for a submission, which is that a normal thing, $3 to $5 for a submission. We would make, we get 6,000 submissions after all of the like fees that get taken away from submittable and processing and all that stuff. What's that? Like $2 times 6,000, that's $12,000 a year. That's not really enough to do anything. And it creates an extra barrier for people who maybe are unbanked or like don't have a credit card, don't have like, just, I don't like the barrier. It doesn't seem like it's worth it's not worth it to me. It's not it's not enough money to make a difference. And I think it's against like what we're trying to do. I would rather have a cap on the number of submissions so we can get through them all in time, or have shorter reading periods than to charge reading fees. It's just not, it's the same thing with ads. It's like, it's not the windfall that people think it is. And it discourages people who have never published before, especially, or maybe are in other countries from doing that.
Interesting. So you guys are in the middle of a big fundraising campaign. Can you tell us about it? What are your goals and what are you seeking the funds for specifically?
Thank you for asking.
Like an NPR.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. We all love NPR. So our website has been running off the same WordPress template for over a decade, which is pretty wild, because of, funding just issues since the beginning. It's just not an investment people have been able to make. And it's really causing us more and more problems when it comes to formatting, the ability to search, the way we can present poetry and comics especially has been an issue. And then some things just like don't hold onto the site correctly, especially with images and that kind of content that's older in our archive. So we're doing it to try to preserve our archives because we have so many of them being around for 14 years. And also just making it workable for the present and hopefully into the future, removing those glitches, removing some of those security risks, because we also run, payment through our website, and trying to build a membership program. We want to make that easy for people and easy for ourselves to manage.
And what would people get out of the membership program?
Oh yeah, so we have a couple of different membership options through our site. They start at $7, and one is digitally focused, where you get exclusive content every other week. You get discounts on merch. We give you insights onto what we're looking for. If we have certain calls for submissions, or like very specifically like topic focused calls for submissions, because we do a few theme months a year. Like we have one coming up in the fall around adoptee awareness. It was from the perspective of adoptees versus just adoption stories. So we'll have like the editor give insight into what she's looking for. We're about to launch a new column about different practices in your daily life, artistic or rituals that like inform your writing. So we'll have that editor talk about that too. So it starts with like a digital level of membership where everything is mostly just going to come into your inbox, kind of like Substack, but we don't want to go to a different platform because there's issues of control and what if that platform goes away one day? Or Patreon, the same thing, fees, and like, what if that platform goes away? And that's another thing to manage. And then we have the largest level, or the highest level, is if someone wants to bundle the digital membership with letters in the mail from authors. And we commission 24 authors. They're all people that have had at least one book published, to write non-promotional letters for our readers that kind of give some insight into what's going on in their life, and always include some sort of creative prompt, not necessarily a writing prompt, but some sort of creative prompt. And then we collect responses if people want to respond to the author, and we either mail them to them, or they'll include their address so people can start corresponding with authors directly. We've heard some very sweet stories over the years around that program. And it's a way that authors, I think, who are more established, help contribute to the longevity of the Rumpus.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. I wish there was more of that.
Yeah, it's very sweet. And it gets us off the screen, anything to get off.
Right. And that connection and sort of mentorship, that's really cool. So if somebody wanted to donate, or become a member, they should just go to your site? I assume it's pretty easy to find out how to do that on the site.
Yeah, so our fundraiser right now, I'm going to put the link in here. We're trying to meet this goal by next Thursday, and I think we're over 80% there. So we need a little less than $2,000 to hit this design goal so that we can work on doing that background work of like going through our archives, making sure the site is ordered in a way that makes sense over the summer and be able to relaunch in the fall. We have a designer on board already to do the work, but we need to know that we can pay him before we sign the contract. And then for memberships, that's something that we are looking for all year round. And I'll add a link that's on our store site.
And another question, if somebody was interested in becoming a volunteer with you, are you open year round to volunteer readers, and how should somebody go about doing that?
Okay, I'm answering this one. I would say like it depends on what you're interested in volunteering for. We don't really have like explicit volunteer application periods or anything like that. So it's really often a question of just like timing. So you could email an editor, you could email me. And I think like having gotten those emails over the years, I think the thing that is most helpful is like, if you can clearly say like what team you're interested or what section you're interested in reading for, you can look at the website and you can see like some teams don't have readers. So like, maybe not those. But then that way I just basically like forward the emails to the editors and they're the ones who really decide for the most part.
Okay, so somebody could reach out, you might be looking for readers, you might not be, but they should just try and see.
Yeah. Worst thing that happens is I send it to the editor and they're like, no, thank you.
And then in a few months, we might, have to revisit and say, we do need you now.
Right. Come back. So this has been great. I have one final question for both of you. This is something that I ask all editors because people are just curious. We know that it's a ton of work, and we know you have a lot of other things going on in your lives and other professional obligations. So what keeps you at it? What keeps you motivated? What keeps you excited? And how do you sort of sustain your energy and devotion to this project?
I guess I'll start first. Coffee. That's important. Number one. I think it was really difficult, like over the pandemic times, to not have those in-person spaces to connect. But going to AWP, starting here to do some in-person events in Asheville, and we've done a couple in New York and all over the place since things started to let up a little bit. Just honestly, like hearing firsthand from people that they've read something they loved on the Rumpus, they've submitted and gotten a really, thoughtful rejection even to some sort of connection with their writing. Having people tell me they published with us like years ago and that was their first publication. All those things feel really meaningful to me, to know that we're holding a space in the community to give people some sort of inspiration or a way for them to share their work and connect with other people. That's really, I know we run an online website, an online literary magazine, but the in-person stuff is really, I think, what keeps me feeling like motivated when I can have those times.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I think that's true. As much as people sort of rag on AWP, there is that really nice benefit. It's just meeting people in person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
realizing we're all humans and verifying no one is a chat bot. That's
Right.
when we go to AWP and there's a robot that comes up, is like, I submitted and you published me, then we know it's over.
Someday soon, perhaps.
Oh God.
Alysia, what keeps you inspired and kind of excited about this work?
I've been thinking really furiously as Ali was talking, and so I'd say the things that she said, but also I'm definitely like the less personable of the two of us, I'll say, which maybe I shouldn't say in a recorded thing, but I really am by far the less personable of the two of us. I'm the one who, like, I think we'd both rather be behind something, but I'd rather be like with books all day. And I think for me, a large part of it is honestly like looking at everything that's closed, and just how different the literary landscape is now from when, I don't know, when I was in grad school, or even from like, 3-4 years ago or a few years ago. And that is very disheartening to me, for obvious reasons. And so part of this, I think, is very much just like, because we've been around for so long, like, I do think that it is important. Like, sometimes it feels like don't drop the baby a little bit. But we have been around for a really long time. And I think that the work and the space that the Rumpus occupies and has, with emerging writers and being volunteer staff, is a really important one. And it's something that I care about and that I see disappearing. And so in addition to all the really lovely positive things Ali said, I would also just add that like pure stubbornness and like a refusal to like let the world sort of, it would be a lot easier to not run the magazine, truthfully. But like, it's important, so we do it. So yeah, I'm sorry, I feel like I should have ended with something really uplifting, but that's my honest answer.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I think it's an important one. I mean, lit mags do sort of feel like an endangered species right now, so it's nice to see. And I mean, it's honest, right? You don't always show up like it's not always the first priority, but you make it a priority because it matters and they matter. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see so many people having to build their own platforms from scratch with the, Substacks and stuff like that. And that's amazing for some authors, and it does work for them really well, especially like if they're very focused and, maybe have a community already. But to be able to be that space for authors that don't have that yet, like, it's just so few of them now, it feels like,
Yeah.
I feel like Ali has the numbers for this. Like, how many readers do we get on the site a month? Do you know off the top of your head, Ali?
We get over 50,000 unique viewers every month and over 1 million a year. That's that's a difficult thing to accomplish for people who are starting out, building a social media platform, building a newsletter list, building their own website. And this way, you are boosted by the other people in the space, the people that have come before you, the people that are being published around you.
That's great. Well, thank you guys. It's an amazing project, and good luck with the fundraising campaign. It sounds it's kind of cheesy to say, but now more important than ever. So thank you so much for telling us, what goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us, Becky, and thanks for the work you do. I definitely follow along and get some insights into what other editors are doing, what other spaces, and even, some really kind of gross and questionable things are useful to hear about.
And thank you everyone for coming out. Always great to see you, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you.